Now that's all well and good, we've got our host in our vCentre server, but of course one of the main reasons we're going to use a vCentre server is so that we can create a cluster and have multiple hosts in that cluster and give us high availability and all of the other benefits of a cluster. So to do that, we're going to create a cluster. So we're going to right click on the data center there and say new cluster. I'm going to call this cluster HA1. I'm not going to enable vSphere HA at this point. And say OK. And then we just drag the host into that cluster. So now we have a cluster that contains just one host. And so we can see under the cluster the VMs there and the host there. Let's turn HA on actually. So enable HA. And we see it completing some tasks on that host to configure it for vSphere HA. Now, of course, there's not much point in having a HA cluster with only one host, because if that host fails, well, we've got nowhere to fail over to. So we need another host in there. I have, in fact, built another host ready, so we're going to add a host to the cluster. Pop in all the details for the host. Again, we get the certificate warning, so we tick it and say OK. Again, the same summary, what version and what VMs it has found, but it hasn't actually found any because there's nothing running on that host yet. And finish. And again, we'll allow that to add the host into the cluster. Excellent. We can see that has gone into maintenance mode. It says the HA agent on this host is disabled. Now that is probably because I haven't actually configured anything on this host yet. It's completely empty. It doesn't even have any data stores at this point. So we're going to go through and add the data stores onto this host. Now the process for adding data stores through vCentre is fundamentally the same, but it is laid out differently. Things are in a slightly different place, which is why I've left it till now to add those data stores, because I thought it was a worthwhile demonstration. So first of all, we'll go to Configure, and we need to add the iSCSI software adapter. So we'll say Add Software Adapter, and we can choose iSCSI, FCOE, or NVMe. So we're going with iSCSI. We take a look at our running tasks. We can see that's been open, that's been added there. We scroll down. There it is, VM HPA 65. So now we will do network port binding. We'll add, and exactly the same as before, we bind it to VM kernel 0. And dynamic discovery, add the discovery path. So we've now added those paths, and we see here, due to recent configuration changes, a rescan of VM HPA 65 is recommended. So we say rescan adapter, and if we take a look at the tasks pane, we can see it did that scan. And hopefully if we look at storage devices, we can see it flat out failed. So what have I done wrong there? I've put the wrong IP address in, so let's correct that. So I've put in the IP address of the host, not the FreeNAS there. So that was a bit of a an error. Right, there we go. Rescan adapter. That's better. We can see the 700 gig partition there now. So I can now hopefully take the host out of maintenance mode. Now, maintenance mode, I should clarify, you can put a host into maintenance mode, and as long as it has no VMs on it, it won't automatically start running VMs on that host. So if you've got, let's say you've got 5 hosts, you put one of them into maintenance mode and another host fails, it won't use that one that's in maintenance mode. It's useful for when you're making a series of changes and you don't want to suddenly find a VM has been moved onto that host when you're in the middle of doing some disruptive work to it. However, it's now cleared from maintenance mode. Now we can see there's an exclamation mark on these hosts at the moment, and there's 2 reasons we can see for that. First of all, the host has no management network redundancy. That's absolutely fine, that's to be expected, because at the moment my virtual hosts literally only have one physical network card, so that's fine. The other message that we're seeing there is actually quite interesting. This message here about the host isolation address. Now we'll just talk briefly about what that means. So vSphere HA or high availability is intended to keep your virtual machines available when there are issues with your host. So predominantly that means the host has failed. It has literally gone offline. But it can also mean a network isolation event. So the host is online and working, but it can't communicate with the network. Now, vSphere has a method for detecting this isolation condition. The hosts communicate with each other using both the network and the storage. So the vSphere HA agent will create a folder on a data store, which it uses to write information to about the host, and you can see that there. So FDM, which is short for Fault Domain Manager, and we can see here these files that the hosts are actively writing to make each other aware of their own health. So if one host loses communication with another host, it can then use the data store to discover that actually the host is still online, but it's lost its network connectivity, and we can define certain behaviors as to what we would like the host to do in that situation. But there needs to be a tie break, because in our case here we've got 2 hosts. So if one host can't talk to the other, we need to know which of those hosts it is that actually has the problem. It's all very well saying they can't talk to each other, but it's highly likely that one host has a network connectivity issue and the other doesn't. So how does it know which way around it is? Well, it uses the host isolation address, which by default is the default gateway on the VM kernel NIC. And in this case, in my little lab environment here, the firewall that we have there, or the router should I say, is not responding to ping from the internal network. So I'm going to go and make a change on that firewall configuration, and that will clear that message. Also, we have this vSphere HA heartbeat data store. So again, as I say, the hosts can communicate with each other using files that they store on the storage array to identify when one of the hosts loses network connectivity. That is called a HA heartbeat data store, high availability heartbeat data store. And this is telling us that it wants us to have 2 data stores for that. And at the moment, we've only defined 1 data store. So again, this is just a lab environment. I'm not too worried about that, but in a production environment, best practice is to have at least 2 data stores and select at least 2 of your data stores to be heartbeat data stores to allow the hosts to communicate in the event of network issues so they can determine the best course of action to keep your virtual machines available. Okay, so I've made that change now, so hopefully if we refresh this, there we go. We can see that message about the host isolation address disappeared. We can suppress the warning there about the network redundancy. And there we go. So if we now refresh that. Yeah, so we've still got the data store message there, which, as I say, this is a lab environment. I'm not too concerned about it.